En primer lugar, me gustaría presentarme. Yo soy Leire Barañano, soy la directora general de Naker Tecnalia. Naker es un centro de investigación y desarrollo vasco especializado en el sector primario. El sector primario estamos hablando, bueno, yo creo que a lo largo de la mañana se ha hablado sobre la importancia de la producción en términos de sostenibilidad, en términos también de autenticidad. Y bueno, no me gustaría alargarme mucho, simplemente voy a hacer una breve introducción de Paul. Creo que vamos a tener una enorme oportunidad de escuchar a Paul. Es una persona con una trayectoria muy singular y muy importante en un tema que, como comentaba en la introducción, es muy relevante, que estamos hablando de la autentificación y la trazabilidad de los alimentos en un entorno tan global o tan globalizado como estamos en estos momentos, donde la información, donde la verificación y donde la capacidad de poder transmitir al consumidor, en este caso a un comensal de un restaurante o a una persona que va a comprar un supermercado, una tienda, el origen del producto, la materia prima, la autentificación, de dónde viene, que se tratan de materias primas originales. Bueno, yo creo que son aspectos de gran relevancia si queremos construir una agricultura, una alimentación segura, saludable y, por supuesto, totalmente de confianza para el consumidor. Paul, please.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. It's good to be back in San Sebastian. I was here about 10 years ago, and I was looking at traceability and how to look at sort of forward-looking traceability systems, and I was dealing with a mineral water company, and someone handed me this water, and I see it's in Salas, so good to be back. Okay, so a little bit about me. I work at almost like the science policy interface, but more on the sort of research side, but I've got a strong sort of policy background. And I work at Fairer Science Limited, head of agri-food research there, and the goal there is really trying to genuinely join up the agri-food chain. We always talk about agri or food. Even when people talk about it joined up, they really still segment it. So that's one of the goals we're trying to do there, and we're trying to provide solutions for industry. But I'm also, 1 day a week, I work at Newcastle University at the Agri-Food Research and Innovation. And that's really a joint institute between Newcastle University and Fairer Science Limited. So just a little bit about Fairer Science Limited. You might not have heard of us, but we used to be government, used to be CSL. Some people might have heard of us then. We're a unique UK construct because we're 25% government and 75% private. And I'm part of Newcastle University, so basically anyone, we cater for all. But really, it's the big focus now is sort of moving to help industry prevent problems that government would have to deal with. It's the best way of thinking about it. So we have about 350 scientists, interdisciplinary. We have a long legacy of food safety and plant health protection. As I say, we're joining that all together now into a whole area of looking at emerging risks, faster diagnostics, trying to solve the problems before they really become big issues, smarter surveillance and reducing waste, etc. So I think one of the reasons, trying to think why I'm here, so what part of our strategy is very much to use advanced technologies. So we're always looking at early adopters of technology from academia, research, primary research, really interested in emerging risk. I'd also say emerging issues. It's the same thing, really. You're just looking for things out there which are changing. And the whole goal is to develop smart systems. Okay. And we have a big emphasis now on big data, so the people that we're recruiting, where before they used to be experts in mass spectrometry and nuclear magnetic resonance, now they're really into algorithms and machine learning, so we're recruiting a lot of those. Another reason why I might be here is because we're heavily involved in big international projects. So I coordinate food integrity. So if there's anything you want to know about the things I've been talking about today, just go to Google, type in food integrity. It'll come up right at the number one, and that's the website. And there's a huge amount of information there, all aspects of how you authenticate, prevent, try and anticipate. There's surveys in China. We've been doing surveys about how they look at Western foods and things like that. Huge amount of information. There's a smaller one that we coordinate, which is to try and get all the national funding bodies together to think strategically about how they fund research. Everyone is duplicating, especially in Europe, is duplicating the research, and really what we're trying to do is to get people to think strategically. There's one specifically on olive oil, huge area. That's a big project which is probably about 6 months old. And just as a legacy, we coordinated a big project on protein insect, which is now a key area for expansion in terms of how we exploit insects. Okay. So the things that I'm going to talk about in terms of the brief, my presentation I think is probably going to be a bit more mundane compared to this morning's brilliant lectures. So I'm going to look at the current state of food authenticity and traceability and some of the sort of what I would call emerging technologies. And a small amount of time on 2050, which for reasons that some of our previous speakers have said is quite difficult in a way. Okay, so this is the fundamental sort of where we are at the moment and some of the key problems we need to change. So if you went back 10 years ago and you were talking about food in terms of a regulatory perspective, you would have just been talking about food safety. We have a whole European and worldwide, sort of in the developed world, infrastructure which ensures that our food is safe, or tries to ensure our food is safe. And it's actually very good at doing that. So you can buy food anywhere in Europe, the US, in the developed world, and you will never find something on the label saying this is safe. It doesn't exist because it's a fundamental right in the developed world that all food is safe. So you won't find it safe. You might find something which says this doesn't have allergens or etc., but it won't say it's safe. That's our right. Now, if you look at the big difference now is that instead of safety, we have these other aspects that the consumer is demanding we address. So if you say it's of defined quality, the consumer expects it to be of defined quality. Fit for purpose or fit as it's labelled. Doesn't mean it has to be fantastically high quality food. It's of the quality that the consumer expects. So, and also authenticity now as well. If you say something about on the label, the consumer expects it to be what it says. So I'll give you the corollary sort of situation. As I said, you won't find anything which says anything about the food is safe. But you will find adjectives describing the other two aspects, quality and safe and authenticity. And that's the fundamental problem we have. So you'll find something which says 100% authentic. Have you ever bought anything which is 50% authentic or labeled 50%? You'll see things 100% organic. But actually, if it's organic, it should be organic. It's not 100%, and that's the problem. We need to get rid of those adjectives, and you should just get what it says on the label. And that's what food integrity means, that you just get what you think you're getting. Now, the fundamental problem with all this is that sort of 10 years ago, and I coordinated a big project on traceability, and certainly the industry thought they'd got it cracked, so that they have, especially the big industry, they would be able to trace their products from a barcode, and they had some pretty sophisticated systems. And there are systems you'll hear about soon about things like blockchain as well, which is trying to get a better handle on relating the barcode to financial transactions. But that part is actually the cheap part, because there's lots of big wins there and economies of scale. But it doesn't solve the problem. The fundamental problem and the costly problem to the industry is the verification. In other words, it's no good just looking at what's the barcode on the packaging, it's what's inside which is the problem. So for those, certainly in the UK, who know about the horse meat problem, that was the fundamental issue. Some of the people thought they had good notional traceability, but actually they were tracing the barcode if they were doing that, or they had probably had some paper-based logistical traceability. The real problem was that it wasn't beef inside the packaging, there was some horse meat in there as well. So that's the problem. Now what everyone is trying to do in terms of technology is to try and get this verification procedure so that you match the outside to the inside. Simple. That is the problem that everyone is looking at. And hopefully by 2050 we will have done that. So the next question is that if we're talking about gastronomy, we're really talking about this. So we're talking about what we do at consumption. Now, you may say, well, this is all big industry. When I go to restaurants and things like that, this isn't a problem. So this is where we've done a little survey. So this is very much, and our colleagues from Bilbao, ASDI, were the leaders in this. This was within the Food Integrity Project. So this is a bit of citizen science. So what we did, throughout Europe, people like me and students and a whole range of different people went into restaurants and ordered a labelled fish on the menu. So then we order the labelled fish, whatever it is, we have to know what it says. Take a little bit of the fish, put it in a vial, and send it to ASDI, where it's analysed here in Bilbao. The reason you do that, you can get a large-scale sampling, and it's quite cheap, and it's citizen science, which is a big question I think we'll be talking about later today. And there's two big things about citizen science. It's the C and the S. Is it really citizen? And is it really science? And I'm sure that's going to be something we'll be enlarging on later over the next day or two. So we get all of these establishments. So we had 362 restaurants throughout Europe, 550 samples. And Miguel Gonzalez from ASDI was the person who sort of led this, but we were all involved in terms of sampling, but the real work was done at ASDI. So, for the first question is, what is the probability that consumers buying fish in European restaurants, catering, canteens? So I should highlight this, it's not just restaurants, although it's mostly restaurants, but there were other things like catering establishments and canteens. The hawker section for the policy people. So, throughout Europe, 30% of all the fish samples that we took were not what the consumer would have expected. Okay. So, now this is the bit where I might do a swift exit here. So, so what about Spanish restaurants? What do we want to go? Higher? Lower?
Lower.
Lower. 50%. Okay. And that's a larger, the Spanish one was the larger, because obviously ASDI were focusing also on Spain and also, I think, in the Basque region as well. Now, all of these are anonymous as well, by the way, so that's the key thing you have to, when you're doing this sort of what I would call a qualitative survey, we made it clear at the start that this would be anonymous, and these results still are. And these results were presented in the Food Integrity Conference in Bilbao last month by Miguel. So one of the things I just wanted to emphasize here, and why so high in Spain, and also Iceland, by the way. Iceland. Well, actually, you'll have to go back to what I was very careful about what I said about. I didn't say people were non-compliant. I said that the consumer wouldn't be getting what they expected. And remember, I'm sort of close to the science policy interface. It's actually to do with the legislation and the number of fish species that are eaten in Spain and Iceland compared to, say, the UK. We only eat about 10 fish. And the legislation is based often on interpretation at a national level. So in Spain, you have a whole range of fish species and subspecies that they're actually named. So therefore, to be sort of non-compliant, it's much more easy to be non-compliant. Whereas in the UK, for instance, we lump all the species together. So it'll be cod, haddock, whatever, and not the subspecies. So therefore, that's one of the reasons why those are high. So, and I didn't say they were non-compliant, because that's a legal term, and the legislation in terms of labelling for fish in catering establishments or hawker establishments is different to retail. Okay. So I just wanted to sort of maybe just give you a glance of that. It also is a good, interesting thing about there was really no protocols for citizen science. We did it because we were all scientists, and we would say we were all responsible. We know who took samples. But once you get into crowdsourcing and things like that, the validation of what is citizen science is quite difficult. And some of those could be public. People could do something similar to this and just go public. And yet you wouldn't really be able to interrogate the validity of the results. Okay. So this, just to emphasize ASD's involvement in this. The other thing we wanted to look at is that we're certainly doing a lot of, is this emerging risks. So what is the thing around the corner? For instance, could we have predicted those results? Maybe, some of us maybe could have done. But how do you go about knowing what the next fraud is or the next risk? Well, you can do it through several ways. One is by sharing relevant intelligence. So you can tell people, like you would in your home, speak to your neighbours, etc. Have there been burglaries in your area and things like that. So you can share that. And there are various networks being set up. But it's very difficult for industry to share data. It's even more difficult for them, or nervous for them, to share data with regulators. So that's quite a difficult thing to do. You can note similar incidents that have happened. So all these burglaries in your town or whatever. And there are systems for doing that. So they're capturing data every week and relaying it back to you in different forms. So we produce something called Horizon Scan that does that. But you can also look at sort of big data, the environment that we live in, to predict where strange things are happening. And I'll tell you a bit more about that. Okay, first of all, the Horizon Scan system. So this is the one that collects all the intelligence that's happening. So basically, going back to 1999, all these reports, food incident reports, are collected throughout the world, and they're updated every day. So it's linking into 100 independent sources, but these are all publicly available, and around 65 countries. And then they're covering all sorts of things like mycotoxins, processing contaminants, fraud, etc., infestation, and then relaying it into a central source. So if you want to know any more about that, that's called Horizon Scan. So in terms of developing early warning systems, so Horizon Scan is looking at things, the burglaries that have happened in the last week or so, to tell you, or even over the last 5 years or 10 years if you want a trend. What about predicting the future? That's quite difficult. But that's what we're looking at. So at the moment we're using, obviously, big data approaches. So because we're looking a particular interest in fraud, the one good thing about that is that we can link into money. Because food fraud doesn't happen unless people can make money. And the way they make money is by exploiting the differences between sample A, the genuine product, and sample B, the fraudulent product. And if there isn't a price differential between them, they won't do it. So there has to be a price differential. So for us, we have a nice starter. We can use macroeconomics, web crawling, digital media. And through Food Integrity, we have a big platform to develop this generically. And this is some of the work that we've just started doing. So things that we're looking at is... this doesn't work. So we're looking at trade data, global prices, and then profit margin of industries, consumer behavior, and then climate change, things like that. And also, we're looking at digital media, things like Twitter. The problem with Twitter is that it is synchronizing the actual data, because Twitter is all virtually real time, whereas macroeconomic data is probably not going to be unless you're using sort of city-type financial data. Anyway, we use machine learning, and we can look at particular aspects. So the big question is, if you want to develop a system for predicting in the future, how do you validate it? Well, you go back to the future, as we've heard this morning. You have to go backwards and then look at data and see, could you have anticipated it? So that's what we did. So we looked at, for us, we seem to be obsessed with the horse meat incident. So we went back to around 2012, 13, and then data further back than that. And we look at macroeconomic data. And this is the meat chain. And it's looking at sort of like customs type data. And they all have different types of code. So this is the meat code. And these are some of the rhythms. I'm an analytical chemist by training, by the way, so I can understand these sort of graphs. I just like flat baselines and peaks, so this is fine. But actually, this is an algorithm looking at trade data. But if you look at these, so that's the sort of general trend in meat. And then if you look down here, they all look fairly strange. Well, sorry, fairly similar. There's a bit of a trend there. This one has gone off the scale. And this code 205 actually relates to the trade in horse meat and things. So this is actually saying that in here somewhere there is something really strange happening in the horse meat area. It doesn't mean it could be less trade, more trade. It's just different. So what we looked at, this is the sort of data you get. And they looked at this 205 code. And this happened, so this is month 2012. Well, the horse meat issue broke sort of the end of January 2013. This one is June 2012. So we got very strange going on, and some of the sort of anecdotal information suggests that it's certainly been going on since August 2012. So that's sort of the system that's developed. Clearly, in the future, these things are going to get much better, and they're going to use the Internet of Things in a much more powerful way. But what there isn't at the moment is the validation procedures in the Internet. It's just like a Wild West environment still. And that's one of the problems, is just getting rid of all the noise in the data. Like I say, I'm an analytical chemist at heart, so back to my chromatograms, that's the story of my life. I understand all this. So if any of you are ever doing any testing, you're coming to a laboratory like ours to do some testing. You'll find it's quite expensive often if you've got a simple problem. But basically, you pay for these peaks. These peaks are your target analytes, so your food safety problem, your mycotoxins, for instance. It's actually something you do not to solve a problem. It's something you do to show that you've solved a problem. So it's really mostly a risk communication strategy. saying, I've sorted this problem out. But the trouble is, these are known risks. And what everyone really is worried about is what it's not measuring. So what I'm saying is we have historically targeted type methods that only detect the things you tell us to detect. So this could be chemistry, it could be molecular biology. DNA type methods will only detect that particular target. So what's going to change? It's certainly changing now, but this is going to be the way it's going to be done, is that certainly people like me, chemists, have always really profiled the target analyze. But with the technology we have now and is coming and developing, we'll just profile the thing that we're looking at, the product, the matrix we're looking at, and then just detect something that shouldn't be there. So basically, we look at normality, identify any changes, and then identify the cause. And that's a much more powerful way of doing things, because that means you have systems where instead of the customer coming to us with a problem, we ring the customer up and say, look, there's a problem in your plant, before they knew it. The reason we can do this, and I think our other speaker, next speaker will probably be elaborating on some of this, is that we've traditionally worked in this sort of what I call targeted area, knowing exactly what we want to analyze. And the non-targeted area has been in the realms of just a few techniques. What's happening now is some of the big beasts in terms of high-resolution, accurate mass spectrometry, they're operating in this way. What does that mean to you? It just means that they're taking all the data, huge amounts of data, terabytes of data, all in one go, and then with some sophisticated chemoinformatics, it'll just tell you where there's something strange going on. And then if you're using sort of information-rich technology, it'll tell you what the result is due to. That's much more powerful. It's even going faster in the molecular biology area. So as I say, you used to have DNA, well, you still do, sorry. Most of the techniques, like the fish speciation method, would be DNA-type technology, PCR-type technology, this polymerase chain reaction type technology. Now, what you can do is just do sort of a metagenomic approach. What does that mean? It means you just sequence everything that's there. And then you can deconvolute. Now, some people would say, oh, but this technology is really expensive. So I always sort of this. We bought a Pyra sequencer, I think about 6 years ago. Pyra sequencer, maybe a bit longer, 7 years ago. It's obsolete now. It cost about 400,000 euros. So our financial guys, directors, why did I invest in that? This one is like a MySig. I think that's about 150,000 euros, much faster than this. But this is sort of, it's called a MinION. It fits in your hand. It's nanoscale technology. It plugs into your computer. You can throw away the plates afterwards. That's where we're going. So this technology is coming faster than you think. What does it mean for people? Well, for the food, the gastronomy people, what does it mean? That consumers will have to understand that food is not sterile. It has a whole microbiome around it. So there will be a big communication aspect about that. Okay, so this is just showing sort of just an example of the technology, but if you think about this, just think about lots of different attributes rather than this. But this is just a thing we did with industry. So vacuum-packed meat now has changed, so you don't have nitrogen necessarily in it, it's just vacuum-packed, but you get discoloration. So in meat, consumers don't like that. There's nothing wrong with the meat. Consumers don't like it, so they're asking us, what's happening here? Why do we occasionally get this? So similar sort of thing, we profiled it, used high-resolution accurate mass spectrometry. You look at the discolored and the normal, you could just separate them. This is something different. Oops. And we identified that it was difference in peptides content, and eventually just linked it back to a faulty temperature gauge in their plant, so that some of these were getting hotter than they should have done. Simple technique. But you think about some of the things we've been talking about, attributes of gastronomy that you can be able to do, just profile using this sort of technology. Similarly, we run a thing called Origin, which is tracking and tracing food pathogens within a plant or a system. But in the future, we're doing this now, but actually we'll be using this to exploit the food microbiome. So we could separate everyone in this room by their own individual food microbiome. Sorry, not food microbiome, their own microbiome. And I'm not talking about internal. When people talk about microbiome, they're usually talking about gut microbiome inside. But you've got an external microbiome. And we could separate everyone in this room on their own external microbiome. And you can use that for tracking and tracing foods. Okay. So, food 2017 to 2050. So one of the things I wanted to talk about is this whole aspect of crowdsourcing to validation. So this, if we're in 2050, we're going to be in a much more mature environment. Whenever you have an immature environment, you can't measure things, you can't develop things until you get standards. So it was very difficult to communicate how high that mountain was until you had a standard that everyone agreed on. And it's the same thing in the internet. There are no standards. So at the moment, we're in almost like a Wild West territory where a mobile phone linked to a spectrophotometer, which they're developing now, would be able to tell you anything, but there won't be validation because there isn't necessarily the whole science behind the validation aspect, especially when it's citizen science driven. So we're going to be in this area where verification will be clear, and I'm sure that when we get to 2050, there will be a whole suite of verification tools and evidence-based, because it will be our new environment. It will be the environment we live, so that evidence will be much more important. I did the same thing as our earlier speaker, sort of Back to the Future, just to give you an idea of the thing. So AIDS is discovered, Macintosh, etc. Genetic fingerprinting was just being involved. But 2050, so for me, what's going to be happening is that insects are going to be clearly a part of our diet, for sure. Animal feed, packaging, it's going to be chitin-based, a lot more chitin-based packaging, healthcare, and cosmetics. That's already starting to rumble in terms of, certainly in Southeast Asia. There's going to be a large gap between rich and poor due to the price of food, I'm sure of that, and that means there will be a price differential, which means there will be food fraud taking place. A two-tier system with high-value natural food, low-value processed food or synthetic food, mass-produced. Internet, highly regulated, dominates all transactions and communications. Aquaculture dominates in terms of production. Food microbiome, what is good food? It's a question for later, maybe. New technologies, well, we'll have metric tools for validation. Obviously, a lot of robotics. Synthetic biology, we're going to have meat is grown synthetically, for instance. And competes with intensively reared meat. The question I wanted to ask the audience really to think about is I'm sort of an expert in authenticating food, but what is real food? You can have authenticated food, but is it something that we associate in terms of gastronomy? And who will be the guardians of good food? Because you could have a whole system which will authenticate food, but who will be the guardians of good food? Thank you very much. These are some of the team at FERA who've been working on this, and also the European Union, ASDI, and Food Integrity. Thank you very much.